Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our program is about to begin. Please welcome Semafor's Andrew Friedman.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Semafor World Economy Day 4. It has been a fantastic week of programming. I'm Andrew Friedman, General Manager and Head of Public Affairs and Corporate Partnerships at Semafor, and thanks so much for joining us here this morning. Semafor was launched 3 years ago at a time defined by information overload, eroding trust, and accelerating complexity. We set out to provide the antidote, though. Fair-minded, transparent, global intelligence for the new world economy. Semafor World Economy truly brings that vision to life. It is now the largest gathering of global CEOs in America, convening more than 500 global CEOs, hundreds of top leaders from business and government, and from more than 89 countries annually here in Washington, D.C. The discussions you'll hear today, and hopefully you've tuned into quite a few this week already, they're driven by Semafor's global newsroom, who have gathered here from our bureaus in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Gulf. Our conversations focus on helping leaders navigate extraordinary complexity by curating and surfacing the richest insights, ideas, and diverse perspectives on the new world economy. This morning, you're going to hear a session about charting the next opportunities, which brings together conversations on how ascendant economies are best positioned to become the next engines of global growth, and how innovation, governance, and geopolitical navigation will determine where opportunity and risk are rising fastest. But first, I'd like to express our gratitude to Citadel Securities for their partnership on today's session and being a title partner of Semafor World Economy. We're grateful for their support in helping us create a space for independent, intelligent, live journalism. And with that, let's get to the news. Thanks again. Cheers.
Please welcome Ian Bremer of Eurasia Group and Ben Smith of Semafor.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks, Ian, for making the trip down. I've been talking to CEOs all week who are, kind of, I think, by nature, sort of optimistic people, but they're in a great mood. Markets, S&P at record highs, and yet when I read you, and I read your kind of essential weekly note, I feel less optimistic about the state of the world. Do you think the kind of American business leadership class is out of touch?
No, I think they're in touch with their businesses. I don't know that they're as in touch with what's happening in the world. I don't think they're as in touch with how much long-term capital the Americans are undermining by governance that is unilateral and is considered not aligned with most of America's long-term partners and will be taken advantage of by China. So those are the things I worry about. It's not tomorrow. It's not like the dollar is going to suddenly collapse. I mean, the technology companies are all extraordinary. We know all of those things, but I can't look at the direction the world is in right now and say that I feel as good about where the United States will be in 10 years, given decisions that I see being made by all of America's allies everywhere and the human capital underneath that, that you can't be as optimistic about what the U.S. is going to look like at that point.
We had the Chuck Robbins, the Cisco CEO, who heads the Business Roundtable at an event the other evening, and he said that they take some heat because they aren't out there criticizing the administration in public, but what he's found is that it's much more effective to talk to the administration in private and that it's a good way to get things done. Do you think that's a healthy dynamic?
I don't think it's a true dynamic. I think that when a lot of the leaders are in front of Trump directly, they're even more flattering than they are publicly. I mean, I have seen members of Senate and the House who are crowing about, privately about how much they're really, when they sit down with Trump, they say X, Y, and Z, and then I'll see a text they just sent the president, and it will be sugar-coated beyond belief. And they're not lying. I mean, there'll be an instance of, but sir, I think if you did it, frame it this way, but it's beginning with how, by the way, this isn't just happening inside the Republican Party. It isn't just happening among business leaders. It's happening with world leaders. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman, right? When he sees Trump, the conversations are definitely more favorable to doing a great job, keep going, as opposed to the greater caution that the Saudis feel about what's happening in this war in Iran and the vulnerabilities that they have if there is further escalation. I see so many people, I'm picking on one person, but this is happening systemically. And it's a very bad dynamic for governance. If you're in a business environment, you want a CEO who has experts that are capable around him or her, giving them the best possible advice. You have literally the exact opposite of that dynamic in the United States, the most powerful country in the world. You have someone who is incredibly capable, very smart running the country, but has very limited expertise on policy, is massively overconfident, has some good advisors around him, people like Scott Bessent and Marco Rubio, and then has some incredibly incompetent advisors around him, like Pete Hegseth, for example, RFK, and none of them are giving him unvarnished, real expertise and advice, and that gets you what we just saw in the last 6 weeks in the Middle East.
I mean, do you think he has a clear picture of the world, Trump?
I don't think anyone has a clear picture of the world. I think that we all come with our biases and our freight. I think that Trump has decided that his way is the right way. And because he's in a very powerful position, sometimes that leads to big wins. Look, John Kerry, right, who wanted to be president, and will tell you that he should have been president, right? One of the smartest people on foreign policy from his perspective that you'd ever meet, right? And he said that you could not do peace in the Middle East until there was an Israel-Palestine deal. He was wrong. He was horribly wrong. Is that because Trump was smarter than him? No. It's because Trump used a position of power to recognize that things could be different. That got him the Abraham Accords. Everyone else in the policy establishment was like, it could never happen. That was a huge win. So Trump is capable of big wins that no one else would get. We saw that in Venezuela. He's also capable of extraordinary damage. And both of those things happen all the time. And I don't think that the former is worth the latter. That's my view.
And I think, I kind of want in a moment to get the kind of Ian Bremmer world tour, but to stay in the kind of...
No, but you're focused
the
right
capital of...
right now, yeah.
We're in Washington. The U.S. is obviously exporting a lot of instability right now.
And the U.S. is the principal driver of geopolitical uncertainty in the world today. So it is right for you at Semafor to begin with Washington.
How much do you think corruption and the rule of law are becoming a problem here?
Becoming? Does anyone think becoming is the right way to ask that question? Show of hands. Anyone think becoming? Right? I mean, it's not new. It's not our first rodeo.
Strike becoming.
Coin-operated democracy. This is not our first rodeo with that. When people ask me, will November be a free and fair election? I'm like, you think it's been free and fair elections? Billions of dollars, special interest paying, capturing the regulatory environment? This is not Canada, right? This is not Europe. This is not Japan.
All right, Dr.
The
Chomsky. I got it.
structural corruption in the United States is very significant. It's by far greater than any other advanced industrial economy, even Italy, which is something, right? And
so then maybe the question is this something new, and does it trouble you?
it's not new. It does trouble me, but it's much worse under Trump. So I think and many people are complicit. Many organizations, many individuals in the United States, some probably in this room, certainly some live streaming, many globally are complicit. Wave to all of you. No, but look, I think that there are two different things happening in the United States right now driving this uncertainty. The first is structural, and it's been coming for decades. And it's a change in the way Americans think about leadership in the global order. It is, we don't support free trade the way we used to because it's not benefiting a lot of Americans in our view. Instead, we want subsidies. Instead, we want tariffs. Instead, we want inshoring. We want people investing in American jobs, American manufacturing, right? And forcing other countries to put a lot more money into that. You're going to see that no matter who you elect, right? You want an end to the wars. Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. Don't like that. You're sending people that don't have power into wars to fight for people that do have power. We don't like that as Americans. Don't want it. Not Democrats, not Republicans. We want more secure borders. Don't want all these people coming in. Don't want all these illegals in the United States when you're not taking care of people that have already gotten here legally. Those things are structural. They are why Trump won. Because he was aligned with those things, right? Then you have things that are personal. Things where Trump is putting his own best interest and his family's interest and his inner circle's interest above those of the country. Some of that is vainglorious, like I want Greenland. I'm not going to negotiate with Denmark because it's not about national security. It's because I want Greenland. That is unique to Trump. It will go away in 3 years. It will start to go away after midterms. And those of us that are watching this have an obligation to help it go away because it's undermining the United States. And there's a lot of that, and a lot of that is in the staggering kleptocracy and the billions of dollars that are going directly into Trump et al.'s pockets. And none of us should sit and be okay with that, even though, again, a lot of people are making a lot of money off of it.
I mean, I think people in populist regimes around the world often think there's maybe a small price to pay in that kind of personalized corruption because it replaces a kind of systemic corruption. And you certainly Orban, this was a big feature of the Orban government, but there is something about populism that seems to be associated with a kind of personal lining of your pockets.
Constitutional majority. He's not woke. He comes from Orban's party, but he wanted to drain the swamp. Trump ran on draining the swamp. Trump also ran this time around on releasing the Epstein files. That, you've got people that were involved in pedophilia, sexual trafficking, massive corruption, lying about it in positions of power. And what did they do? They skated. And so Trump was the guy who was going to ensure that they saw justice. But then it suddenly became a nothing burger. Orban, for 16 years, had systematically done that to the Hungarian people. And so instead, now, Orban's gone, and they voted for a real populist who's focused on securing the borders, who's focused on traditional Hungarian social norms and mores, and isn't going to be, I don't think he's a wildly pro-giving away your sovereignty to Brussels guy, but he's going to focus on benefiting Hungarian people. And there is an opportunity in 2028, on the left and the right, for someone that rejects the personalistic Trumpism that is going to try to actually benefit Americans. The United States needs a political revolution.
Who is the Peter Magyar of America?
Well, that's the question. It was FDR, right? That's what the New Deal was. That's what the creation of a professional administrative state was. The U.S. political system is clearly broken. Americans don't believe in it. Most Americans think that the system does not represent them. When I started my PhD in '89, the wall came down. And at that point, people around the world actually looked up to the United States as the political system they wanted to emulate. People still look up to the U.S. for AI, for how incredible the military is, to the U.S. dollar, the financial system, things like this. They looked up to the Americans like that. No one would look to the U.S. today and say, we wish our political system ran like yours.
How do you square this decaying U.S. political system increasing kind of political instability and isolation from the world with this unbelievably powerful technology sector that is increasingly vital to the world. How do you fit those things together?
You can get away with a lot more if you are providing growth. And the fact that the markets are where the markets are and so many Americans participate in the markets help. The fact that, labor rates have actually increased and wages have actually increased over the last years has certainly helped. But Americans still right now don't feel great about the future of the economy, don't feel great about affordability. So you do eventually get to the breaking point. But
what about for our global
time.
counterparties who have to deal with Anthropic, with Google, with OpenAI, kind of have to grit their teeth and deal with Washington? I mean, how are they going to square those things? The U.S. has a near monopoly on these frontier models.
Yeah, you're right. It's a huge question. Because on the one hand, the Europeans are going to build defense capabilities outside of the U.S., and that means Rheinmetall is going to make a lot more money, and U.S. defense industry will not. Mark Carney on Monday was speaking in Montreal, got a standing ovation, said 70 cents for every Canadian dollar, baby dollar, not as much money, but still, right, goes to American defense firms we're now going to spend on Canadian, standing ovation. But that decoupling at the same time that the United States has Anthropic and OpenAI, which have just become utterly indispensable to the future of your cybersecurity and any critical infrastructure with software, means you need access to those things. But you don't trust those companies, or you don't trust the United States government. That's going to put a lot of these countries near term in a position of great vulnerability. And that's volatility inducing. Again, I mean, the markets are doing great, but there's going to be a really rocky transition to get from an American-driven globalization with all of the stuff that the U.S. still has to that post-American hedge.
The last couple minutes, let's talk about the Gulf. I think there was some people thought at the very beginning of this war that it would drive the GCC together, create a more unified, more kind of militarily aligned region, between particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis. What are you seeing now?
That's clearly not happening. I think that there's still going to be a lot of necessity to work with the United States on defense and on intelligence. But you see, at the same time, just like the Europeans now understand, we have to worry about security. We have to take care of ourselves. The Gulf states are now saying, definitely, we've got to worry about security. We have to take care of ourselves. And that's creating two different blocks. That's creating the Emiratis with Israel and India on technology and on more defensive alignment. But it's at the same time, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia with troops being sent to Saudi Arabia, aircraft, nuclear weapon program, together with Egypt and Turkey. And over time, that is likely to evolve into two competing blocks in the future of the Gulf, that if you're investing in the Gulf, you have to think, well, which is my headquarters? And how does that play with the other side? And can I have strategies that are applicable to both? I think that post-Iran, the Middle East is going to look very different. I think Europe is going to look more different. That transatlantic rift is only becoming greater as a consequence. And of course, China sees all of this as an opportunity to make low regret, low risk moves to benefit them long term.
I think one thing, at least I did not have on my bingo card, maybe you did, was the central role of Pakistan, which is a close ally of China's too here. Just what should we make of that?
Well,
their sudden kind of assertion into this.
They're in a unique position because they have a better relationship with the United States, and some of that is personal and money driven. They have a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, but that had been sotto voce for a long time. But now, because of Iran, they're being much more public about it. The UAE has just pulled billions out of Pakistan, and the Saudis have immediately offered to replace that money. That is a significant change. And Pakistan has, for a long time, had an easy relationship with the Chinese, military and economic, even though it's been somewhat disappointing of late. Having said that, Pakistan's GDP is like less than 10% of India's. So let's not pretend that suddenly CEOs are going to be talking about Islamabad in a meaningful way. India is still the story. Modi is incredibly popular. He's winning local elections. For over 10 years, he's been driving a consistent economic reform agenda. And even though the US and China dominate AI, if anyone's in third place, it's India, and that's a big deal. So I wouldn't overstate the importance Pakistan is playing here, but it is a real position, and I do hope and expect that in upcoming Islamabad discussions that a ceasefire gets extended and we move further towards ending what's been a pretty disastrous war.
Could go on all day, but we're out of time. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ben.
Please welcome Leslie Marsdorp of British Investment International and Alexis Aquagiram of Semafor.
Good morning. So, Leslie, you are the head of the UK's Development Finance Institution, and you oversee the organisation at a moment of huge change. Obviously, we've seen the shuttering of USAID, and across the Western world, aid is just dwindling. Aid budgets are going down. We saw the UK government a few weeks ago also cut its aid budget, and there's been a real shift towards defence spending. So with that in mind, how does the environment look to you, and how are you adapting?
Thanks, Alexis. Look, I mean, I would argue that, and many people would agree, that the development finance system have been in need of a sort of structural reset. So the current changes that are being implemented is definitely in response to significantly less resources available for development and for humanitarian aid and so on. But this reset is also driven by us wanting to remove the inefficiencies and dealing with the fact that aid has had some serious shortcomings. There's a desire now to move towards more investment. A lot of the countries have been uncomfortable, if you like, with almost a paternalistic donor-recipient relationship. So the changes that have been introduced now are very much structural in nature. We're moving away from a model that was based on, G7 countries who, as you know, in 1971, a resolution was passed where the developed world agreed to spend 0.7% of gross national income on aid. And that was underpinned by a desire, as you know, that was in the period where decolonization happened. A lot of these countries emerged from colonialism. That model is now outdated. The intention of this new era is to have more local ownership of the development process, and development resources is very much complementary to that.
So how do you do that? I mean, what does that look like in practice? I mean, I know, for example, you've got a new 5-year strategy that you're going to unveil, I think, next week. I mean, can you tell us a bit about that and what you're targeting?
Yeah, so I'd say there are three main shifts that underpin the new strategy of BII. The first one is that we are going to assess our effectiveness, not on how much capital we deployed, but we're going to assess on how much capital have we been able to mobilize. So in this era of declining fiscal resources, declining resources for development, we want to use our resources in such a way that we are more catalytic, if you like, that we are able to improve the risk-return profile of investment projects so that pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds can come and invest alongside us. The key point is that there's large volumes of resources, savings pools in the institutional investor community, pension fund, insurance capital, and so on, but they do not have the risk appetite to invest in some of the least developed countries. So what we want to do is to use our resources in such a way that we can de-risk these projects. So at the heart of the new strategy, the first element is what we call both domestic resource mobilization, where we're trying to get more domestic pension funds to invest alongside us. And then the second component is to have more flows of investable resources from the north. The second key element of the new strategy for BII is to look at more what we call market level impact. In the past, Alexis, we invested in projects, we invested in companies, and we assessed the impact of those investments. How many jobs are we creating? How many new entrepreneurs are we financing? The impact on youth, impact on reduction in emissions, and so on. we are now more focused on making sure we can improve the ecosystem. So it's not just the individual investment, but we want to make sure that we improve the investability of those markets, competition. I'll give you a concrete example. In Ethiopia, we invested in the second mobile operator alongside Vodafone, which is a large UK telephone company. As a result of our investment about 4 or 5 years ago, we invested about $220 million. The cost of data has gone down by almost 60% in Ethiopia. So what that means is that our investment has produced multiplier benefits for that economy. So that approach, we are now going to be much more deliberate about introducing that metric in all of our investment.
And are there particular sectors that you're targeting with this?
So in Africa, there are a couple of core foundational sectors that are central to the growth of the continent. Digital infrastructure is one. I just referenced the Ethiopian investment, but investing in data centers, investing in emerging AI, there's no question that AI will be a growth engine for the transformation of the continent. Agriculture, for example, is at the heart of the GDP of most of African economies, something like 25% of the GDP of most of the sub-Saharan African economies. AI will now bring in the possibility to do yield prediction. We'll be able to use climate and weather analytics. There will be a sea change once we are able to deploy the emerging technologies. We are very confident that it will have a dramatic positive impact on the continent in terms of increase in productivity, increase in incomes, and increase in access to services for underserved communities. The second most important sector for us is energy. Mm-hmm. You cannot grow an economy without power. And as you know, 80% of the people without electricity in the world reside on the African continent. Needless to say, the single biggest priority for development today in Africa is the provision of electricity. So we have a campaign. We're working with the World Bank, with the African Development Bank, with the International Finance Corporation. It's called M300. And essentially that campaign aims to electrify 300 million people on the continent by 2030. So it's a coordinated effort by the entire development finance system to bring power to the African continent.
But of course, the best laid plans could be knocked off course, and we've seen with Africa specifically, there've been a number of global shocks in the last half decade. We've had the supply chain shocks off the back of the COVID pandemic, the supply chain shocks off the back of the Ukraine war, and now we're seeing the Iran war play out and the knock-on effects, which we expect to be inflationary. Fuel prices are going to go up. How do you see this impacting African countries, and how can FDIs step in? Because with the best laid plans, these are 5-year strategies, but these are huge shocks that affect people very quickly on the ground.
There's no question, as you have just said, that the impact of the conflict in the Middle East and the war in Iran will have very immediate and very direct and very negative consequences for the African continent. And the transmission mechanisms are indeed, as you've outlined. Firstly, higher oil prices. Secondly, the flow through in terms of inflation. And thirdly, food insecurity, right? Disruptions, increases in the prices and the lack of security of supply around fertilizers. So the key issue now is to make sure that we are able to reduce the impact. And we are now studying all of the development finance institutions that are engaged in development in Africa. We're trying to analyze how best can we immunize the major effects of the conflict on these economies. But it is going to be a function of how long how protracted the conflict is going to be. If there's a resolution soon, the impact will probably not be as dramatic. But if it lasts for several more months, I think many, many more people will go back into poverty. The development agenda will face some really acute challenges.
But as I said, this is not the first shock. Even if it's not a protracted war, the chances are there may well be another major global shock that has a knock-on effect downstream on African countries. Are there any broad thoughts on how you can basically protect these countries, protect the private sector as well in these countries?
Look, I think, as you know, the most recent shock was naturally COVID. And then the last major one was obviously the 2008 financial crisis. I think the most important focus for development finance institutions is to focus on the core foundational infrastructure that the continent has some serious deficits in. I already referred to digital, I already referred to power, I've already made reference to sort of health infrastructure. I think it's so important to invest in the technology that has the potential to lift the productive base of the economies.
And on that infrastructure point, I mean, I'll hark back to something you said earlier, which is about de-risking and getting involved in partnerships because the risk appetite isn't there. There's that and mobilizing local capital.
Yeah.
And it's been a real push from organizations like the Africa Finance Corporation, African Development Bank, to really mobilize that capital, that you see the pools that are there on the continent. How's that going with Africa specifically, and what are the bottlenecks that still hold things back? And then also, the Africa risk premium, how can that be overcome?
So one of the major challenges that we have on the African continent is that we have something in the order of probably $2 trillion of capital in pools of institutional investors, whether it be pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and so on. These entities are heavily overweight in investing in government securities, and a lot of them are investing in fixed income securities. They invest in Euro bonds, US treasuries, and these funds are not actually deployed in building domestic infrastructure for a whole number of reasons. Some of them are regulatory, some of them are linked to fiduciary responsibilities of the trustees of those pension funds who have to secure a particular return. That is changing now. There's a growing recognition that we need to deploy more of the pools of savings in Africa into productive infrastructure. So we are doing that now as BII. We have a strategy. We've already started this in Ghana, for example. We launched a platform called Growth Investment Partners, where we started this. It's a funding platform for small and medium enterprises. And as you know, SMMEs constitute the bulk of the GDP of most of the African continent. But in that funding vehicle, we managed to attract the biggest local pension fund in Ghana to invest alongside us. We did the same in Zambia. So instead of those funds flowing out of these countries and being invested in Europe and other parts of the world, we're able to crowd it into domestic economic development.
And these are, I mean, these projects, obviously they can't exist in isolation, and countries can't exist in isolation. To have genuine growth on a large scale across the continent, you need to boost intra-African trade.
Yeah.
And the African Continental Free Trade Area, in theory, should be doing that, although many people are skeptical about the impact that's actually had.
Yeah.
So how does that fit into what you're doing? How do you
as you know, one of the real challenges the African continent have, and it's just a function of history, is the fact that, you've got 51 countries, several of them landlocked, and you have individual countries with their own regulatory regimes, their own legal infrastructure. It adds layers and layers of unnecessary complexity. So increasingly now, there's much more of a regional approach. So you have some more developed economies, for example, let's take in North Africa, Egypt, which has got more established capital markets. If you take South Africa, much more deeper capital markets. And then you have other parts of Southern Africa where markets are much more nascent and much more underdeveloped. So instead of having stock exchanges and building capital markets domestically in each of these countries, we need to develop much more regional approaches. So we can see signs of that happening now. Another area is around industrial policy and critical minerals. There's a huge need right now for critical minerals that go into the solar panels, that go into the technologies that propel AI. These countries are now looking at how can they pool their resources, how can they look at the logistics chains through a more regional lens so that they don't each have to deal with the sort of infrastructure bottlenecks that we face. In short, what I'm saying is that there's much greater regional integration that is happening, and we facilitate that. We invest in, for example, in ports. We're building a port now called Banana Port in the DRC. DRC is one of the countries classified as least developed and also as a fragile and conflict state. That shows you the power of development. A single port can transform an economy, and that's the business model that we follow.
And we've only got about 30 seconds left. So as a final thought, what would you like to see happen? Like, if you had your way, what single thing would you like to see happen to really increase that intra-African trade and that regional approach you're talking about?
I think the single biggest barrier, which is what I touched on already, is finding the mechanisms to channel local resources that we have in especially the larger economies on Africa, in South Africa, in Egypt, in Kenya, in Nigeria, Senegal. Many of these economies have pools of savings, but they are just not deployed into the domestic economies. If we can facilitate and enable that $2 trillion to be invested in core infrastructure in Africa, it will enable trade and growth in a much more dynamic way.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Leslie. We appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
After you.
Please welcome to the stage Jason Droege of Scale AI, Penny Pennington of Edward Jones, and Amna Nawaz of PBS NewsHour.
Jason, Penny, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, we've got some big topics to cover here and not a lot of time. Let's jump right in. Penny, I want to start with you. You're obviously at one of the largest wealth management financial services firm on the planet. The intersection of the work that you do and AI and technology, just talk to us a little bit about how you look at that, where it's being implemented, and if you see the robots taking over the functions that the humans currently do.
Yeah, we're in a human-centered business. We advise 9 million clients and their families on their life journey, the milestones and the moments that matter. So the way I dimension it is advice is our business, trust is our currency, financial fulfillment for those families is the outcome. Human combined with technology improves all three of those aspects. We can be more efficient in dynamically managing investment portfolios. We can get insight from the fact that 20,000 financial advisors are having 100,000 Main Street client engagements a day. And so the insight that we get about what people are concerned about how the world is affecting their world, and what they should do with their financial plan to take advantage of that in some cases, or to protect against it. The insight and information that comes from technology, from AI, helps with all of that. I want to talk for just a second about the trust part. We believe that we can't call ourselves trusted, but we can do things that make us trustworthy. Trustworthiness comes from your profession, from your skill at your craft. It also comes from the humanity of, why are you incented as a financial advisor? How are you incented to give me the best advice? I'm about to tell you things that I've never talked to anybody in my family about. Things about my hopes and fears, the things that I am most afraid of. How do I know that you're going to use that information well? And then how do I know that my money is with you, that you're not going to let anybody in to get it? And so technology combined with the humanity of the right incentives, the right motivations, the right infrastructure, technology, and approaches for, in this case, utilizing AI, that's how we act in ways that are trustworthy while always putting the human, the humanity, and the relationship at the center.
So fair to say the AI, the tech, is mostly being used for like data gathering and analysis? That's where you see it most efficiently used?
Well, there is that. So asset management and dynamically rebalancing portfolios. Here's another place. We have a lot of investors who are 65 or over. There's a special place in hell for the people who are preying on those senior investors, and fraud is ramping up like never before. We can use AI tools to see inside transaction patterns and engagement patterns, that we can see that fraud detected across the enterprise, but also in specific circumstances where we can intervene with that individual and that family more quickly.
Jason, this idea of a white-collar apocalypse, we've seen a lot of headlines. What do you make of it?
Yeah, just real quick first, Scale AI is in two businesses. We sell data to model builders, and we help enterprises and governments implement AI for very important decisions, critical decisions, decisions that require regulatory scrutiny, et cetera, like financial services. In that, we get a pretty interesting window into the labor market because we're working with Fortune 500s, the US government, international governments in terms of the impact on labor. I think it's like a very one-dimensional view to look at the world as like it is a human world or it is a automated robotic world. I think it ignores a lot of the our self-interest and our willingness to maybe trust a human being for reasons that we wouldn't necessarily trust technology. So I completely agree with everything that Penny said on the dynamics of human-to-human connection. And as long as you have that human-human connection, I don't think you're going to have like an apocalypse. And this idea that we're not in control, that we can't steer it, that humans aren't adaptive, and that it's almost insulting to human beings to imply that this is going to happen in the near term. That's number one. And number two, real quick, is that we don't see it happening today. A lot of the layoffs that are happening right now because of AI, if you really dig in, it's sort of like washing the layoffs. I mean, a lot of these companies are saying it's because of AI, but a lot of it's just like right sizing, and they need an excuse.
I want to note you said not in the near term. Does that mean that in the long term there could be more of that? And let me, if I can get more specific on this too, just the idea that Penny's using it for fraud detection, right? We've seen AI functions replace humans when it comes to like coding or customer service. So that's some job displacement, right? Even if it's not an apocalypse.
So technology for the longest time has changed the way that we work. Like the primary job 100 years ago is not the primary job 25 years ago, is not going to be the primary jobs in the next 25 years. We need to adapt. I think the notion of a apocalypse implies that something happens immediately. Nobody knows what to do. There are zombies in the streets and all kinds of other horrific images that get put into our head. That is not going to happen. But we are going to need to adapt. The tools are going to add capabilities. They are going to make companies more competitive. Those more competitive companies are going to put pressure on less competitive companies. In that way, if you don't provide services to your customers because you're not adopting the latest technologies, your livelihood could be at risk. But that's because you didn't adapt, not because there is something that just happened to us out of our control.
So let's talk about this moment, because Penny, I know you mentioned what we're all noticing, we've been reporting on, it's the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in history. I imagine people are coming to you for all kinds of advice. I guess the question to tie it into this, under this umbrella topic we're talking about, is if someone wants to go on ChatGPT and say, what should I do with my finances? How should I be investing this money? Talk a little bit about how you see the intersection of the guidance that people can receive by talking to a chatbot or coming to speak to a human.
So give you a little dimensioning of this intergenerational wealth transfer. $124 trillion is going to transfer over the next 20 years between the silent and baby boomer generations to the next 2 and 3 generations. This is already in motion. Here's some of the really sad data. So far, 79% of the people who are going to be moving that money on have written no narrative, no instruction for the next 2 generations who are going to get that money. The next 2 generations so far, the millennials and some of the Gen Zers that are getting that money, the majority of them say they regret what they've done with that money. And there is about a quarter of that money that's in motion today that is sitting dormant, uninvested in the life journey of that family. Human dynamism comes together to create new solutions, to get reassurance, to raise people's confidence. That's why I said our outcome that we're shooting for is financial fulfillment. Financial fulfillment is subjective. It is the confidence that I have that I can achieve things that really matter to me. And it is the math. Am I on the path to achieving those goals that I'm working with my financial advisor on?
Jason, pick up on what Penny said there. Is this vision sort of one of humans as quality control, humanity control? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 elements to this, right? One is what Penny is talking about with this human interaction, human trust. When you break part of that down, and she would know better than me, but when we do implementations, and we do them across industries, Defense Department, we do it with, or War Department, and healthcare providers like Mayo Clinic, et cetera, we sit down and we say, okay, what is the actual outcome that we're trying to get here? And they go through all of the most important things that need to be implemented in order to, say, deliver an outcome for a patient in the case of Mayo Clinic, or deliver a logistics requirement in the case of maybe our military. And one of the things we help our customers figure out is, what is the cost of a mistake? Because these are probabilistic systems. We've all used ChatGPT, we've all used Claude, and the like, and they've all made mistakes when we've used them as consumers. But when you're talking about these very critical use cases, you can't have that without a human in the loop, right? The idea that you are going to set and forget a probabilistic system, it is generative AI. It is generating new ideas and new content that has not existed before you prompted it. It is different than previous ML systems before, which take existing data and reduce it down to an insight that is sort of like finding a needle in a haystack. As a result, you need human judgment at appropriate steps in the process so that you can minimize mistakes where mistakes are expensive. And you can make mistakes. Humans make mistakes all the time, right? Sometimes we hold too high of a bar for technology because humans are fallible too. But there are certain mistakes like making financial decisions. And they might pay an extra $200,000 a year in taxes. Yeah. Okay, well, if an AI bot tells you to do that and you do it, that's a pretty big deal. But a financial advisor would clearly be able to review that and tell you that's a really bad idea. That is a bad way to make a mistake. You're probably not going to, that's not the first wave of things that you are going to automate completely through. And so human beings are in the loop now, and at the very least will be on the loop observing the systems. And these are the systems we actually build for our customers so that the human beings can be part of it.
Can I follow up on that a little bit? If you can pull back the curtain on sort of the implementation process, the conversations you have as you're designing these systems, the humanity piece of it, the empathy piece of it. For Mayo Clinic, you're dealing with cancer diagnoses, right? For financial services, you're dealing with how do I handle, my father passed away, how do I manage these funds? How does that get injected into the conversation? How big a piece of the conversation is it?
It basically is the conversation. So first thing we do is we sit down and we say, can AI actually solve this problem? Because there's a lot of problems that we're just, like the technology is not mature enough for it to solve the problem with reliability and safety, and we steer our customers away from those types of things because people just, it's new technology, so people don't totally understand. The second is we say, well, who are the subject matter experts inside of your organization that should be influencing the way that this application works? And so at the very beginning, we're pulling in, okay, who do you think the best of the best are in your hospital or in your financial services firm? Or who should we be digitizing their idea of the perfect workflow? And then leadership will look at that and say, okay, this is actually what we would like to happen. Let's figure out how we can build this and then build a system that is constantly improving as the usage of the application changes over time, which is something we don't talk about very much, right? If there's one thing that is not discussed at all, it's, we talk about a world with AI or without AI, and it's very coarse. But the reality is you have a world with AI, and then what? Well, then people start using the tool for new things. Humans are creative, they come up with new ideas. And as someone running a system like this, you need to know, like, is it doing things that are out of bounds for what we expected people to use it for? Or are people actually inventing new ways to use this tool? And then what is the feedback loop, which is a human feedback loop, to actually further benefit from the tech?
Penny, help make this real for us too in terms of the conversations you have as you're working to implement more tech, work these efficiencies into your system. What kind of problems are people coming to you with right now?
Yeah. Well, the problem that has always been a hindrance to having access to great financial advice is great financial advice is at its best tailored to that person, to their unique circumstance, their unique risk tolerance and time horizon, and then to the curveballs that happen to their lives. It's a very dynamic process. And what AI and what technology enables us to do today is to provide that kind of dynamism in the background at vast scale. Before, only very wealthy people could get a dynamically managed portfolio that a financial advisor was engaged with them whenever they wanted to be engaged with them, whenever they needed to be engaged with them, associated with the moment that matters. Today, we can provide tax-optimized, dynamically managed investment portfolios that remove much of the bias of building an investment portfolio. We can do that at vast scale, which means we can provide access at a valuable interchange of value with our clients at scale that was not available outside of higher net worth for higher net worth relationships. That's one way that it enters. And so when a financial advisor is spending less time building up and managing that portfolio, where do they spend that time? They spend that time being a human. They spend that time getting underneath the life of that family, what they're afraid about, that inheritor or that wealth builder or that founder who's so worried about how they talk to their kids about what might happen next and want them to have enough but not too much, right? That's a very personal kind of conversation that takes time to develop.
This issue of trust, as you mentioned, is your currency. Jason, I'm sure that trust issue comes up a lot in the implementation work you do, especially with the clients you serve and the systems you're trying to improve. How do you talk about that with your clients in terms of them maintaining accountability and transparency as they're working to hopefully add more efficiencies with the tech and AI.
Yeah, I mean, there's a familiar pattern that happens when we're doing these implementations. And if you have like a Tesla, you sort of notice how you kind of get used to the level of autonomy that it has over time. You first get the car and it drives you around. So I think these systems, the familiar pattern is. The customer will come in and say, I want to automate this. I think I can generate a lot of cost savings or efficiency or productivity gain or whatever. And then you go, okay, well, let's generate a set of insights first that you might not have been aware of before. In this case, it might be investment ideas that even your best managers might be able to expand how they think about a problem. And then they can make a decision. And then they go, okay, well, when do we take an action? And then, okay, let's talk about what's the smallest action we can take? How do we kind of ease our way in, have human beings very involved in that action, and then they get comfortable enough with the action happening automatically that they go to more sophisticated actions. And when you take those actions often generate new insights. So you go insight, action, insight, new insight, and then do you want to take the next action?
So it's like a comfort building exercise.
That's right.
We talk to them about how we're building and utilizing these tools to ensure that the human remains at the center of the relationship and of the judgment. We're very clear about our AI tool governance, the way that we approach that from a risk management standpoint, and ultimately the way that we approach that in terms of acting in a trustworthy way with our clients. We're also involved in partnering across our industry with other providers, as well as with our elected officials, to help them understand and see what people are talking about. We're talking about how it can be useful inside our own business, but we also have the insight that comes from millions and millions of clients who are thoughtful and concerned in some cases about how this affects their livelihood, their employability, and the livelihood and employability of their kids and grandkids. So it is something that takes all of us to be thinking about. Jason, I love what you say. This is not an apocalypse. It's not. There are wonderful ways to utilize new technologies, but we're the humans, we're in control, and we should act that way.
Penny Pennington, Jason Droege, thank you so very much. Please join me in thanking them.
Please welcome Dave Mosley of Seagate Technologies and Reed Albergotti of Semafor.
Hello. Hi, Dave. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
So I want to start off with a personal story. I had to buy a hard drive recently, being the geek tech reporter that I am, a high capacity one for backup. So I ordered it on Amazon, and it never arrived. And I know why, because it's probably in a data center somewhere. And there's this huge shortage right now. So my question for you is, you've been through these huge boom and bust cycles many times in your career. We're in a big boom now. Do you ramp up production as much as possible, or do you play it safe?
I would say we ramp up production when we have the signal, but what we went through a couple of years ago, undulations after the pandemic, was really profound, and we were ramped the other way, ramped down, had to let go a lot of people, had to shutter a lot of manufacturing. So it's been a wild cycle. Fundamentally, the demand is picking up, and we see bright spots on the horizon. But it's been a trying experience, and picking the right interface and what has to go into which channel has been very difficult. So hopefully we'll get you what you need, and appreciate your business, but give us a little time.
The stock price I looked at is like over the past year is like over 600% or sixfold increase. Western Digital's in the same place. There's the sort of like AI, I guess AI pilled people in the industry who would say, you're not understanding this. Like this is bigger than anything you've ever seen. Like you got to ramp it up as much as possible. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think AI is a moniker that is too widely used. You and I have talked about this in the past. It gets confusing. I think to baseline where we grew as an industry enormously as a function of client server. I mean, everybody had a hard drive in their PC, but they weren't utilized, they weren't full. They were, it was a different world back then. And the peak of client server was 2012. Not ancient history. You can imagine how much the supply chains have had to change. The devices that are now in data centers are very, very different. They're not optimized for cost, they're optimized for data center performance and things like that. What I would say is coming out of the pandemic, the biggest growth engine that we've really seen is video. You think about the experience you want now is a video first experience on your phone or what you see at home, and we're all using the applications to learn and do other things with, and that's the fundamental driver for the storage layer so far. And AI is processing that video more and more effectively. It'll process big data sets more and more effectively, and that's one of the reasons why people are saying, well, let's save more data so that we can process more data with these new engines that we're getting. And I think that's one reason for the optimism.
You're also innovating with things like Hammer, which you can explain, but where you're increasing the capacity of the individual drives themselves. So theoretically, that would do something for the supply issue. Does that help at all? Does that help alleviate the problem?
That's actually an interesting question. Yeah, when I entered the industry, I mean, I'm pretty old, but the drive we were working on was less than 1 gigabyte. The biggest drive in the industry was less than 1 gigabyte. Now we're talking about 40 terabytes, so over 40,000 times bigger. And what we see right now, and this is some of what we've just been through as well, is if we continue to innovate, we make those drives higher and higher capacity, that's the best way to bring more exabytes to the world. Stopping and taking our smart people, which, they're limited in number, and pivoting all of them over to building more factories and things like that would not be nearly as efficient. And you would end up in a space where if you slow down innovation, you're not delivering as many exabytes 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. So it's a balancing act, though. Yeah.
I mean, with Moore's law slowing down, just the ability to fit more data on whatever the material is, do you have have you figured out is there a limit? Like, is it 100, like 200? What do you think?
We've talked about that so many times. I mean, there was a time 25 years ago where people talked about the super paramagnetic limit, and they came up with a number, and we blew right through it.
Yeah.
I would say that what's really interesting now, especially given all the times we went through, and we've just been through a big technology innovation curve with this Hammer that you're talking about, with photonics and laser integration and integrated circuits made of photonics, and then the material set on the disk. It's been fantastic. That's giving us a big rise now in areal density capability, which is going to yield better and better hard drives. But we're also waking up from this period and looking out at all the other innovations going on in the world, saying, I can use that, and I can use that, and I can use that. And so, the more other people are doing things too, we get those great ideas and we integrate them. I don't see a near-term limit for sure.
Yeah. Do you? I interviewed Michael Kratsios last night. He's the head of the OSCP, talking about science, basic research funding in the U.S. A lot of this stuff comes out of academia originally. A lot of these ideas. How do you think the U.S. is doing there on the research front?
Yeah, U.S. and the world. I was probably pretty cynical, having an academic background myself. I'd say if I went back 20 years ago, the engine was stalled somewhat. I mean, from a modeling perspective, and I happen to be an experimentalist. I say, let's not model it, let's build it and see if it works.
Yeah.
Even that was kind of boring. Right now, it's actually kind of exciting. And so I think there's been a pivot over the last 10, 15 years. Some of that's professors that are getting more excited, more funding, whatever, but some of it's just, I think tech is a little cooler now than it used to be, and we're not in the doldrums anymore. That said, it's all tempered by something that everyone's dealing with right now. Is there's a lot of marketing on top of it. You have to cull through that stuff, but down at the very base, there's some really interesting innovation.
Oh, that's good to hear. So your products that have NAND and DRAM, things like that, those are dependent on the semiconductor industry.
Right.
Then big shortage there. At some point, is the demand going to get so high that we just don't have enough of the equipment to increase the manufacturing here of EUV machines, et cetera?
It's always a concern. So that on the semiconductor side, that's not really what we do on the HDD side, the hard disk drive side. But the semiconductor side, those are long lead times, really sophisticated equipment. It's pretty impressive technology, just the equipment itself, and then how to use it, and getting it dialed in and getting it to work right is art. The hard drive side, there's a lot more complex supply chain. You could just take one apart and look at it and be impressed. Mechanical parts, electronics, and then the devices we have to make to write and read the data. So I would say in general, the story is long lead times on the acquisition of the equipment, the build. It's not just a matter of building a building or buying one more piece of gear. Even our technology, it takes from wafer start to drive out, it could take 9 months right now. So that's once you have it dialed in. So there's long cycles and long cycles of learning that we have to suffer through.
We've had the memory shortage now. We've had chip shortages. Is there something that you think is sort of the next thing around the corner that there's going to be a shortage of?
It's so hard to tell. I mean, we've been dealing with all kinds of problems in the world with supply chain, especially after the pandemic, right?
If you knew, would you tell me though? That's the question.
I might, but I don't know. I mean, I would say we deal with things as they come up. Global supply chain companies that are used to these kinds of challenges. I remember in 2011 we had a similar challenge with floods in Thailand, and it sent reverberations everywhere. That was probably the last time we had supply so far below demand like it is right now. But the teams are working it really hard, trying to answer for the customers, because we realize ultimately our job is to make the highest capacity drives we can and make as many of them as you can to service our customers, let them go get after all these different markets with their new applications.
Yeah, and they're buying a lot. Do you have a number, by the way, like for the largest data center project that you've supplied to or something, like how many hard drives have gone in there? Or
I would say that there are, individual customers that are in the, I'd say more than tens of millions.
Tens of millions.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's
a lot of hard drives.
Yeah, if you think about it, we have shipped about 3.5 billion in our life. Most of those, again, optimized around PCs, the products that we've all used, and they were right underneath our fingers for a long time. But now the unit shipments are much further down, but the exabyte shipments, the drives are now packed with like 10 disks in them. And the exabyte shipments are growing like crazy. And to the extent we can keep that density, the form factor is very fixed, but to the extent we can keep the density, we make the data center more efficient. It stores more data for less power, less space, all the things that we need to be doing to make the world more efficient.
Yeah, that's interesting. The form factor is fixed because, like, when you look at these racks, they're totally customized now, completely configured. Do you think the form factor will ever change?
That's an interesting question too. I mean, theoretically we could, but it's not just that rack. But it's you think about all of our tooling and our suppliers' tooling and everything. There's a huge
have to stick
inertia
with the standards
to overcome. Right? Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, so a couple of years ago, speaking of these data centers, everyone thought everything was going to be in the cloud. And now we're seeing this kind of shift. There's a lot of factors. One of them is people want to run inference locally. They want to, the companies, but also the prosumers who are running, OpenClaw and their Mac Minis, et cetera. So is that trend, which is good for you, for sales. Is that trend going to continue? Do you think it's a blip and eventually we end up all in the cloud?
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic. So I hope that there's a resurgence at the extreme edge. And I think there probably will be too, for a couple reasons I'll get into. But what I would say is that we've gone through these breathing modes before. Once there was a mainframe where everything was centralized. And then in client server, we all had our data on our PC where everything was decentralized. And then now the cloud has built so much efficiency in. We still have data on our phone, but the cloud is very, very efficient infrastructure. And so it's centralized again. But remember, the data that man creates or the nature has or whatever is out at the edge. It's not in the data center. And it's underutilized today. And I think for a lot of reasons, people will be able to gather that data at the edge, process that data at the edge. It's very expensive sometimes. The data has gravity, so it's very expensive to get it to the data center sometimes. And as edge AI picks up, I think you'll start to see a lot of value created out of that. I also think that there's people being displaced right now that are really good software programmers that may be worried about the way software is done. What are they going to do? They're going to be entrepreneurial back at that edge, I hope. And with that, you'll see a lot of great applications that develop at the edge. Some of them will be big data applications, some of them small, that's okay, but they make our lives more efficient. And I think ultimately you'll see a resurgence of data management at the edge.
Are you talking about on the consumer side, things like home robots, et cetera, like that kind of, is that what you're envisioning?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one. I tend to think of robots like let me say it this way. Surveillance, everyone looks at the camera, but it's really more of a data problem. Like where'd the data go? Who's processing? Who's got it? What are they doing with it? And actually that data chain there's a lot more money in the data chain than there is in the cameras. Think about the robots the same way. It's a robot. Does it look like C-3PO or R2-D2? You're broken if you just stop at the robot. Where's the data going? From a home robot perspective, I don't want you helping, fold my laundry if you're a intelligence gathering device or a surveillance device. Yeah. But there's a lot of other applications where that would result in tremendous efficiency, say in a factory, where you can get a lot of efficiency. So these edge applications where the data is, where you could get a lot of efficiency and you're not in trouble with privacy and things like that, there may be a huge wave of applications. And a lot of people are calling this kind of thing physical AI right now. Let's gather data, understand what's really going on in the world. This is not about large language models and text and that anymore, because text is pretty small data. This is about what's really going on in the world.
Yeah, and so you have visibility into that because you're in all these devices. And I know you've thought a lot about the privacy and security issue. Really quick, as we run out of time, I'm just curious, is there an opportunity there for you on the hardware side and to develop some kind of privacy protections at the edge?
Yeah, there are features and techniques that are used in the drives today. I think one interesting thing is we always think about security as far as hackers in the stack above us, and the stacks are being reworked. When I say stack, I'm talking about software stacks. The stacks are being reworked all the time, but there is an opportunity to come up with better stacks for privacy and security of data, and provenance of data is very important, right? Like if you're going to make decisions, an AI decision off of data, you need to know it came from the right source and it's really the true data that was created at the right time. All very, very important concepts, and we need a lot of big thinkers on that. I haven't given it enough thought, but I'm sure some people have. But I think this is a dialogue that needs to happen.
Sounds like there's some products on the way, but we're out of time.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Luke Petherbridge of Link Logistics, Jack Zhang of Airwallex, and Rohan Goswami of Semafor.
Jack, Luke, thanks for joining us. You guys missed them fighting over who gets to sit next to me and who doesn't. I try not to take it personally. I want to start with a question for both of you. Luke, you run a company that is one of the largest of its kind, a $50, $60 billion company that's in the business of getting things to Americans' homes. The sort of last mile logistics is the not fun way of putting it. Jack, you sit on the other side of that, which is the first touch point for most Americans, buying things and helping companies build products that take people's money. And so between the two of you, it seems that we're very well situated to sort of get a sense of where the consumer is and how they're spending, how they're thinking about spending, whether they're pulling back in certain areas. Luke, I'll start with you. What sort of data or insights can you share about areas of strength, areas of weakness for the consumer in the US today?
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for having me and the introduction. Yeah, so Link Logistics, we are one of the largest owners of warehouses in the country. We have 9,000 businesses, and around 4 to 5% of US GDP flows through our customers that are in our spaces. So I think we do have, maybe not the top of the funnel, but we have a pretty good point of what we're seeing. And I think what I'd use is balanced optimism today. And I think even with everything that's going on, what we're seeing from small business leasing volume, small business needing more space, inventory levels, and even customer anecdotes and sentiment, it's pretty good. Where we're seeing the biggest pockets of strength, if you think of areas that have a lot of manufacturing growth or anything around AI and data centers, Dallas, anything in the Southeast, go Charlotte down through Florida, we're seeing really good strength across that, which actually would be counterintuitive to what, if you just watched headlines, you'd probably think there's a real pullback. We aren't seeing that yet.
Jack, from where you sit, maybe a little more consumer focused in terms of the data you have, what's your perspective?
For the folks who haven't heard of Airwallex, we are a fintech global payments business born out of Melbourne 10 years ago. We experienced firsthand as small business owners to making payments globally, leveraging the traditional SWIFT or correspondent banking network that's slow, that's expensive, inefficient. And we have the mission to build the best global payments and banking platform to help small businesses all the way to enterprises to expand globally to receive payment, process payment, hold payment, moving money at the sort of speed of data without the constraint of the traditional financial infrastructure. So Airwallex have processed $300 billion this year, and about sort of $100 billion is processed for U.S. businesses, and we're servicing about 46,000 U.S. businesses, and we help them not only paying vendors globally, also help them to instantly set up bank account in over 70 countries. So think about traditionally that a kind of a global business that's setting our banking relationship with the like of Citi or HSBC for a couple of years to set up banking relationship globally. Now we give the capability to small businesses to allow them to do that in a matter of days. So that can instantly expanding to new jurisdictions around the world, receiving the payments, receiving the revenue, help them to basically competing with more efficiency and expanding that business globally. And what we have seen is there's more important than ever to have our infrastructure to supporting entrepreneurs and businesses, because if you're looking at 20 years ago, people think about a global business, they think about Coca-Cola and Nestle. Nowadays, any sort of mom and dad shop selling on Amazon or eBay is a global business. Any entrepreneurs out of the Silicon Valley building an AR startup is a global business, because they need to not only process the payment, but they also need to actually operate globally from day one as they have customers globally. So we're really here to kind of help U.S. entrepreneurs and small businesses to operate more efficiently and win globally.
Right, and I think your scale gives you that perspective. So just to sort of re-up that question and that idea, when you look at how money is flowing and where it is flowing, are there particular sectors from your customer base, or the people who are actually using these points of sale or using these platforms, that you see as strong or durable, even as the U.S. and the U.S. consumers sort of weathered and navigated a lot of uncertainty over the 6 months? Are there pockets of strength? Are there pockets where people are pulling back?
We definitely see a lot of interesting dynamics from a trade point of view as we see payments continue to shift into more emerging markets that a lot of growth out there. And we also see payments into China is a lot less, and a lot of those payments are shift to like Mexico, Indonesia, the Middle East, etc. So, we're here to kind of building the best infrastructure for all these businesses around the world. We kind of wanted to make sure that they can navigating the complexity of the geopolitics and also the kind of the trade shift.
Luke, I want to talk more about your infrastructure in a second, but Luke, I want to go and turn, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, to AI for a second, which is suffusing and permeating everything we're doing. And we've had a lot of conversations here about how it's changing physical plant, whether that's factories or warehouses. You guys have a lot of warehouses. Can you talk me through a little bit about how you are thinking about deploying AI and whether there are, actually realizable cost savings that you're already seeing through those deployments?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. It's being deployed at scale at Link and as well as our customers. I think the easiest one to think about is just think about network planning. Like Amazon had this incredible ability to put warehouses in the right spot. I mean, a great stat in 2017, Amazon had a facility within an hour of 20% of the US population. Mm-hmm. As of today, that's 89.4%. They have a facility within an hour. So they have network planned that out, and that's, whether you have Sonange or very large models to do that, that is now available to anyone. So when you think of small businesses or even regional players, they can lay that out, which cuts mileage costs and optimizes supply chain, which I think ultimately benefits the consumer, the economy. It makes us more efficient. So we're seeing that dramatically. In physical, where's AI coming in? Robotics has been accelerating, automation of facilities, we're seeing that start to pick back up. It's wildly expensive. But where we have really tried to position ourselves is we want to own the real estate in that path of travel. Where are these great nodes that actually minimize costs for shipping to your door, to a store? And then even think about things like Boeing, how they lay out their plants around the country. They cannot have a $300 million plane sitting at the end of a supply chain with the missing part. So I think what AI has done is exacerbated the ability or accessibility to technology and inventory management, which I think ultimately over time you're going to see this flow through to the benefit of the economy, the consumer, and their margins.
I'm glad you ended on margins there because I'm not a technology reporter, I'm a financial reporter, I'm really an M&A reporter. And so when I think about businesses like yours, really there are two things that differentiate big from small, successful from failure, and that's scale and leverage. And M&A is sort of intrinsic to your business model. You need to be bigger. Your company itself is a roll-up of several smaller REITs. Yeah. And so when you look out at the landscape, commercial real estate has suffered a lot. There's a lot of chop, there's a lot of uncertainty. Do you see opportunities for deal making? Do you see opportunities to continue to acquire and grow?
Yeah, I think commercial real estate is a huge, as you know, an enormous bucket. I think there's a big difference between a C office building and a great warehouse. I believe there is. Yes, there is.
Certainly visually there is.
Look, the 3 or 4 biggest, or the 10 biggest owners of warehouses, we probably collectively own 12% of the stock. It's wildly fragmented. I think there's a big opportunity to buy larger portfolios, smaller portfolios. We're part of the Blackstone network, so we have access to capital throughout the cycle. But scale is your friend. Once you build a business that can operate at scale, the insights and data and access that we have is pretty unique.
How much capital do you plan on deploying towards M&A or towards acquisitions this year?
We don't have a specific number. It'll be multiple billions of dollars, I would say. Last year we bought $2 billion. It'll be multiple billions this year. But it could be way more than that too.
Jack, there's been a lot of chatter in the fintech and the payment space about M&A, possible combinations, some ludicrous ones, PayPal, Stripe, but some not so much. How do you think about M&A as a privately held company, but as a fast-growing, highly valued privately held company?
Yeah, in the last decade, Air Wallets built the best money movement and financial infrastructure around the world from the ground up. So we regulated in over 60 to 70 markets around the world, have 85 payments and licenses around the world. And a lot of the central bank were not able to, not issue new licenses anymore. So we had to do a lot of acquisitions in jurisdictions like, Mexico, in Indonesia,
This
in
is similar to what a
Vietnam.
lot of neobanks have had to do to get their foot in the door.
I mean, I think neobanks are generally more focused on opening sort of bigger markets like United States or UK or Europe. That's kind of where you see most of the neobanks, like the Chimes, the Firm, or the kind of Revolut of the world probably have a bigger, larger footprint across UK, Europe, and some APAC markets. But I don't think anyone have gone to the extent of penetrating more than 120 countries around the world, because we're facilitating global money movement. So it's very important that we're not only supporting the G10 currencies, the big economy, but it's also facilitating transactions between the small economy emerging market and the G10 economy as well.
So if historically that's how you've been approaching M&A, has that shifted now that you've really started to achieve that penetration? Is there a different way you're thinking about deal making and about acquiring scale, whether that's technology or talent or even verticals that you're not currently operating in? You just launched a point of sale product.
Yeah, I think our mission is to help entrepreneurs and business owners to expand their business in every corner of the world. So that's kind of a very clear mission we set over a decade, and we did really hard work to be regulated by the central bank everywhere. Getting a license in Japan takes 7 years. Getting a license in Mexico, the M&A took 3 years, and getting licenses in all across 50 states in the United States took about 6 years. So I think it's important for us to basically reach every corner of the world. We continue to expand into Middle East, to Latin America as the trade shift continue to go to that direction. So we will see M&A will continue to play an important role as we, building the best financial infrastructure in the world.
I'm sure that every coverage banker on the planet is constantly calling you, trying to discern whether you or when you plan to go public. What is your sort of thinking and your sense around an IPO and the time frame with which you'd like to do that?
Airwallex is, been compounding kind of more than 100% year on year for the first 9 years since we started the business in
terms of your post-money valuation?
Sorry?
In terms of post-money valuation?
No, in terms of the revenue that we generate, right? So we raised a new round last year, $8 billion valuation, led by some of the best US investors like T. Rowe and Addition. And we continue to looking at raise money in, as a sort of in the private markets, and there's no urgency for us to tap in the public market. We're going to be doing $2 billion in revenue this year and still growing 85% year on year. And we're likely to process over $1 trillion in payments next year. So with our scale, and we think we're in a very good position. The company is also profitable, right? So at sort of scale, and we don't feel the urgency to go public anytime soon.
One thing about your shareholder base that I do want to talk to you a little bit about and give you a chance to sort of walk this room through. There's been a lot of concern from some vocal parties about your shareholding base, about your exposure to China, about your relationships with certain Chinese investors. Can you sort of walk us through whether you view that as a valid problem or if you have sort of broader thoughts on what people have been saying about you?
Yeah, I mean, we started the company in 2015 in Melbourne, right? So at that time, Sequoia China and Sequoia US are one company, and Sequoia China invested all the best companies in Australia, like Canva, like Airwallex, like CultureAmp. And I think that is more of a historical issue, and then become a problem that now Sequoia China and Sequoia US split it because Australia is part of the coverage of Sequoia China. And none of those Chinese investors are on our board or have any control of the company, and they just a passive financial investor. So we think, in the sort of the current sort of geopolitical landscape, we just need to kind of managing that risk. But also, it's more importantly, we're here to help American businesses, American entrepreneurs to expand globally. And you can't also ignore China as a region. We have a lot of payments like Amazon, Shopify, all these big eBay, all these big platforms. I need to make payments into China, and Airwallex is here to support it. That's why we did an M&A a couple of years ago to secure a license. So we become the second company after PayPal as a foreign company to operating as a regulated entity in China. And we have very strong data sovereignty in different jurisdictions around the world, and we take data security and all the laws and regulations extremely seriously, and we regulate it in all the 50 states in the United States. So that's kind of how we operating as a global payment platform.
I want to change gears and Luke, sort of press you on your business a little bit, because maybe this is my naivete, but it seems to me that you are doubly exposed to a downturn from the consumer and a corresponding downturn in small business spend. When you think about where we sit right now, a lot of uncertainty around supply chain, around tariffs, around the war, how are you preparing your business and sort of girding up for the possibility that we enter some sort of sustained downturn? Because you operate fixed assets that you can't easily hive off and sell if there aren't buyers.
Yeah. Well, I'd challenge that we're just linked to I think consumption is a big part of that. Our fastest growing part of our business right now and tenant base is really around this reindustrialization and huge CapEx spend that's happening around the country. And it's data centers, or it's power and infrastructure, or it's defense spending, or it's advanced manufacturing. All of this has downstream impacts to warehouse demand. So our fastest growing tenant base at the moment is anything around that. And, you know,
Isn't that a risk in and of itself, though? I mean, to press you a little bit, I'm sure if Semafor existed in 1995, there'd be a fiber executive or a fiber adjacent executive sitting on stage with me saying the same thing. If you are so exposed and so dependent on this really two major companies, that's OpenAI and Anthropic, and to a degree the big tech companies, driving so much of that data center build out, if they collapse, does that impact your business arguably worse than a consumer downturn?
So I guess but it's all power and infrastructure. So go further down the supply chain. Those that are building switchgear as automation goes into warehouses, or as manufacturing sort of comes back to the US. So
do you believe that the onshoring phenomenon that started under this, because you can't plan in 2-year increments, you're planning in 10-year increments.
And neither do our customers. Our customers, you're exactly right. They're planning 10-year supply chain change. So when everyone's like, we're going to come back to the US, it's like a decade to slowly move at a time.
And do you really think that companies, I'll pick on Apple, right, which dressed up their US CapEx, their planned US CapEx as a new sort of phenomenon to present to the president. Are companies, they have to walk the walk with you. Are they actually deploying capital here and building the scaffolding for the onshoring of industrialization, or is it just something they can say in this town to the president?
I think, no, I think you are. It's probably not quite to the level of what is being reported or being redressed up, but we are seeing it. You are seeing, go to Columbus. Let me tour you Columbus and you'll see the build out that's happening around Columbus.
You can take me out. I'd happily check it.
Go around, go Buckeyes. I lived in Cleveland, so I'm an Ohio State person. But you know, go to Dallas. I'd go to South Dallas. Like, we build all these warehouses and they're now full. So look, I don't want to diminish, if the consumer slows materially and there's big unemployment problems, that will hurt all businesses, ours included, and our customers. But we're seeing that reindustrialization. The other one is, which I think it helps provide a ballast for our business, is there is this general shift to e-commerce. It hasn't ended. In a decade, 50% of the US workforce will have grown up with Amazon Prime. Not learnt it, grew up with it. My 19-year-old son, he just believes he should be able to get things delivered the next day. Like, that is the way shopping works.
Yeah.
So even if you believe that the consumption pie doesn't grow that fast, there's more of a skew to online, which helps our warehouse. And no customer of ours is more than 3% of our warehouse. So we're very diverse. We are the US economy. There are some good things that are happening in the US economy that is real and touching real estate and local markets right now today.
We could talk about this probably for another hour, but unfortunately we are at time, so we're gonna have to leave it there. Jack, Luke, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you so much.
Thanks, Rohan.
Please welcome Renee Kachillo of SafeLight, Simon Freakley of Alex Partners, and Rohan Goswami of Semafor.
Simon, Renee, thanks so much for joining us today. Simon, I want to start with you. Alex Partners has an incredibly broad business, and it's a business you know incredibly well. And as my colleague Andrew Edgeworth-Johnson said to me, it's probably fair to say that you've seen more CEOs on the worst day of their careers than possibly any other advisor. And I'm curious if you think that the frequency of those worst days ever is growing and increasing and accelerating, especially over the last year with all the ructions and the geopolitical tumult we've seen.
Thanks, Rohan. Well, look, I do get the privilege of front row seat working with our senior leaders at their client sites. I don't think there's an avalanche of crises. I think there is actually very, very heightened anxiety. And so, yes, of course, we see people at their best moments, we see them at their worst moments, but I'm seeing a lot of senior leaders feeling incredibly anxious about this febrile world that they're having to navigate through and lead their companies through as they deal with the constant pressure from investors to show growth.
Renee, you run a business that is in the business of making things and putting things. It's a physical business.
Yep.
Do you feel anxious? Do you feel stressed?
I don't know anyone in this day and age that doesn't feel that from time to time.
More so than you did a year ago then?
I don't know. I think we're starting to build some muscles in the business area around these things are going to come up and we can't hyper-focus on them only. So it's how do you make the discipline and have the discipline to really make sure you're focused on your business strategy, separate from then the crises that come up, and how you manage those is really important.
When we were all talking before we came to DC, one of the things that stood out to me is just the sheer quantity and quality and the intensity of all the disruptions that you've sort of had to navigate over the last year, 2 years, even taking it back to COVID. If you look back at maybe the last 5 years, is there a particular moment that stood out to you where you said, I don't know how we're going to handle this, I don't know how we're going to solve this, whether it was around tariffs, on glass or supply chain disruptions during the sort of total lockdown of COVID? What was the most intense thing you faced sitting in the chair that you're sitting in right now?
I would say COVID definitely was hard for everyone because it was the first time we'd been through it. But really, tariffs have been interesting because the rules of the game changed every 3.7 days. So when you think about that, yeah, every 3.7 days, there was an update that we needed to make sure that we could readjust and qualify and figure out how it was going to impact our business. So, and I think that, in a strange way, helped us build the muscle to be able to manage these things while we're still focused on the core of our business and that long-term sustainable growth.
Could I build on that? Because what I saw from my perch was that actually COVID was a dry run for what actually came.
Right.
Now, we came out of COVID, the mother of all disruptions, having to cope with these extraordinary circumstances, and then almost back on our feet. Of course, we're hit with these geopolitical disruptions, we're hit with these technological disruptions, not just AI, we're hit with tariff disruptions. And so it turned out that when senior leaders got to tariffs, actually they had learned that pausing for too long was not a winning strategy. They had to pivot and move to action. Pace over perfection was what counted. And so people developed, in supply chain sense, for instance, a just-in-case strategy, not a just-in-time strategy. So it wasn't just about how you can get the lowest cost, the most regularly sourced, but you have a regional strategy and a local strategy complementing a global strategy. People have just learned how to pivot, I think. Would you agree, Renee?
I agree completely. And it's a different muscle. It's a phone call, it's a Zoom, that's the focus of your team offsite meeting and where you're going in the next quarter. You have to manage those in the day-to-day versus then the planning and preparation to run your business well.
A rapidity around decision making. I mean, I don't think anyone expected that we would be talking about onshoring in 2026, the idea of bringing back our industrial prowess, our industrial might, or what have you, certainly not 5 years ago. Do you feel, Simon, like the world is moving towards a more multipolar existence where we are less globalized, more regionalistic? How are CEOs thinking about that? How are they planning for that, if that is the case?
Well, I and maybe many people in senior leadership grew up in a world that felt increasingly flat, where you could move goods and services and capital in a frictionless way. The world is now quite different. And I think many business leaders are having to cope with that difference and therefore plan accordingly, to your point about supply chain being one example, but in a dislocated world doing things differently. And so, yes, I think it is a different time. I think tariffs were a significant shock to the economy. There's pressure through the industrial policy of onshoring. It's not easy to onshore quickly. If you're in heavy manufacturing, moving a plant onshore is a multi-year, possibly even a decade endeavor. And so there's been lots of commentary and lots of signaling about the intent to do it. But in reality, these are not pivots that can happen quickly.
No. And Renee, from where you sit, right, you obviously are in the business of largely going to customers' homes, installing things for them. That's a business that takes time, that takes training. Certainly there's technology involved, but you need human expertise. As more and more Americans hit the job market, find it harder to find jobs, are you satisfied with the quality of workforce that you have available to you? Are you hiring? Are you growing? Or are you sort of holding right now in terms of picking up new installers, growing your workforce?
No, we've hired almost 2,000 technicians in the first quarter. And so when you look at that, we're growing. It's a trade. It's also not an easy trade. It's a manual job. And so the question for us is, how do we build longer term careers? How do we keep technicians longer? How do we use technology to help them with tools? But it's an area where we are finding really good candidates, and also looking at who really wants to have a trade as a career versus a trade as just a part-time job for now.
That's become the idea that we are, as a workforce, going to shift maybe a little bit away from the four-year degree towards more hard skills, towards trade schools. Do you offer some sort of training to them when they come, or do they have to come sort of with an AST certification or some sort of advanced degree in their particular field to join and work with you?
No, we train them for at least a 6-week period before they even can assist on a job, let alone do work. And we have a full training program end to end that's very standardized, so they don't need to come with anything. We do look for people that like to work with their hands, they may like vehicles, but that they really love customers and they love the service proposition.
Simon, one of the products that you guys put out, and which I was reading, and which your team shared with me, is this disruption index. And one of the points that was made there was that the executives that are adopting AI and if I'm misquoting this, correct me please, but adopting AI at the highest rate or the most advanced rate are also the ones that are the most worried about it and the most nervous about it. And there seems to be this sort of newfound deep-set anxiety amongst executives that they are going to basically be automated out of existence, that their children or that their juniors will find themselves working jobs that they never would have imagined working. What's your sense of where that anxiety springs from?
So look, I think that it pays to be paranoid at moments like this, that actually people shouldn't sit back in their seats a bit too comfortable with their current quarterly earnings. And so what we're seeing is, just by point of reference, about almost a decade ago, we started studying disruption, about 3,200 executives in the major economies of the world, and started to ask them a bunch of questions, not just to get the pulse check of that day, but a trend. And what has been very, very palpably obvious is the anxiety for CEOs has gone up and up and up because of so many uncertainties, so many disruptions to manage. But what we're also finding is in that cohort of 3,200 executives, there are people who, about 15, 17% of that group, who are simply outperforming all of their peers. They're leading organizations that are growing revenues and growing earnings. So we started to study what is it that they're doing differently. We call them the growth leaders. And interestingly, to your question, Rohan, the growth leaders were highly correlated to the most anxious CEOs. They were pivoting so quickly based on market circumstance, based on technological developments. They were trying all these different ways of capitalizing on AI rather than just being challenged by it. And fundamentally, these growth leaders shared an attitude that they saw opportunity in the disruption, not just challenge. So is anxiety up? Yes. Is that at a cost of performance? Not necessarily, but my goodness, they do understand the very challenging period they're leading through.
You've grazed against something which I've sort of tried to pressure test with folks over the course of this week, which is are companies actually seeing a real ROI on the AI trials that they're running, the spend that they're deploying, because it's millions, tens of millions of dollars just to try these products out. Now, they're not sticky the way that SaaS businesses are. You aren't committed to seats, but it's still a lot of labor, it's a lot of manpower, and it's a lot of cost to get here. Are companies seeing, and are they content with the ROI they're getting from these myriad platforms that all do these kind of very niche things or very broad things?
Yeah, we're at such an early stage of this, Rohan. I think it's very difficult to predict exactly what the outcome is. But one thing is for sure, all the people that are trying different pilots, business leaders, and finding out quickly what works and what doesn't, pivoting away from the ones that don't, pivoting towards the ones that do, these are the ones that are growing their revenues more. Now, of course, if you're a public company, every single investor worships at the altar of growth, every CEO serves at the altar of growth, And therefore, we have to look at those, what pilots are working to drive growth, not just mitigate cost. But I think that it's everybody is trying to find out where they can get a foothold, where the eddy in the stream of growth is in their markets to try and drive their businesses forward.
And if I can chime in on that real quick, I think it's interesting because AI has an easy efficiency layer, and if you start with the easy tactical things that you could do, that will fund the experimentation in the growth areas. But what we're seeing from a growth perspective with artificial intelligence is it's really hard to get the business to abandon the way that they've had a linear path of interacting with customers. They have a logical flow that they're used to. They read what that behavior does because they built this funnel or approach. And now we need to let AI be the native up front and follow it. And that takes an instinctual piece to the business to then tie it back to the core business. And that's very different.
Yeah, and let me just give you a quick example. So one of our clients, big national and indeed global retailer, very, very experienced, very credible leaders that were reading the markets. In using AI engines, they have got so much better idea as to how to price, so much better how to manage their inventory to meet demand, and their revenues have been significantly enhanced by deploying those AI tools. So that's a great example of it working. There's half a dozen things that didn't work and they left them behind.
All businesses are fundamentally people businesses, but your two businesses especially are people businesses. You advise people, you have thousands of installers, Renee.
Yep.
I guess, Simon, starting with you, how are you guys deploying AI internally? Is it changing how you're thinking about hiring or even the kind of advice at the scale that you're able to give? What does that look like inside your organization?
I mean, maybe it's not a surprise, but it's remarkable how quickly people are adopting the AI tools. We have multiple tools. Of course, everybody worries a bit about hallucinations, so now everybody's got quite practiced at using several tools to solve the same problem, using each tool to check the hallucinations of the other. So I would say now that AI, and particularly generative AI, touches about 60% of our global revenues. As a firm, everybody in the firm is using it. The key, of course, is to try and use it on the firm's platforms rather than have these hobby projects going on.
Is it driving revenue? Is there a percentage of revenue that you can now attribute to Gen AI projects?
So what AI gives us as a consulting firm is speed to insight and speed to action. It still requires a human being to understand the context, and people follow people. People are advised by people. Hasn't in any way interrupted the core of our business. It's simply accelerated what we can do.
Renee, from where we talk a lot about how AI is changing white-collar work. Most of your workforce is decidedly blue-collar. Are you deploying that technology in the field with your installers?
Yes, actually, that's where we've started. So when you look at it, it's really our people and our customers are our two biggest audience. And when it comes to our people, we immediately started using solutions to help us screen and qualify the right people to be trainees, to become a technician. And what we did was we loaded our 400 best profiles of technicians and then started to bounce applicants up to those candidates. And that really kept our candidate pool much tighter and really focused on the right group of people for careers. So much better success rate. And then also the tools they do. Think about being a technician. You go out mobile, you're there all day by yourself doing 6, 7 jobs. And to give them tools enabled by AI really allows them to work much more quickly. It's with more scientific approach. Provides a safer solution, and it really gives them the reliability that they're not out there alone. It's much smarter.
Can I build on that? Because another example in the financial services sector, different sector completely, but similar theme. You know, when ATM machines were first designed and rolled out, everybody said it was the end of the teller. You know, bank tellers wouldn't exist. What happened with the rollout of ATMs was actually it did reduce the number of tellers per branch, but people opened many more branches. And the consequence of that was overall the total number of tellers went up. And you can look at agriculture for those examples, you can look at radiography for those examples. The technology doesn't necessarily reduce the number of jobs, it just changes the way the jobs are configured.
There is, though, this undeniable latent angst, which we talked about among the executive class, but also I think among young people who are yet to start their careers, who are sort of staring down the barrel and making a decision. As an 18-year-old, I don't know about you guys, but I was not exactly well-reasoned as an 18-year-old. But as a young person deciding, do I go to college? Do I pick up a trade? Do I do none of those things? Do I found a company? It is sort of confounding to anyone how you make a decision there. Simon, from where you sit, do you still think now is a good time to pursue a 4-year degree, to pursue higher education? Or is it time for us to sort of rethink how we think about education, the next stage of work?
Well, I think it's just more complex. I don't think it's different. So clearly, there's absolutely a reason to have humanities degrees, and absolutely a reason to have
proud history major here.
Arts degrees. Also very important to have science degrees. And I mean, I recently was invited to RPI, the technical university near Albany, where they host one of the IBM quantum computers. I mean, they have, I think, 5,000 people in that community there studying this breakthrough technology. And so, of course, there's still a role for higher education, but I do think that maybe in the super cycle of the last 30 years, we have encouraged high schoolers to go and get a college degree because it sort of lengthens out their education. And maybe there's a rethink about where the value lies. And so I think we'll see a re-enfranchisement of the trades, because I think we all so need them, the working economy, as Jim Farley at Ford calls them, but also a role, of course, for higher education too. So I think it's not different, it's just more complex.
Renee, you actually, as you mentioned earlier, have been doing this for quite some time. What lessons can other industries or trade schools themselves take from the scale with which you've done this and apply to their own work, whether that's scaling up their existing operations or starting up sort of hard skills? Do we see, for example, trade schools at Harvard or Yale down the road? I'm completely serious.
Yes, I think there is a natural propensity in the individual of what they're passionate about, and I think that has to guide a lot of this. Most of our technicians absolutely love working with their hands, interacting with vehicles. They also like the technology. Recalibration solutions have now brought a real heavy tech component to the vehicle. As we all know, vehicles have changed in that aspect. So I do think it comes to the individual. I do think they need great training, regardless, to really know what they're doing, because every vehicle is different in our example, same with other industries. But again, we help a lot of people work their way through college as technicians. And then they decide they want to be a store manager or a district manager. So again, that individual piece, I think, is what prepares you, and then the opportunity you provide yourself.
Maybe even the market drives it too. I mean, at our home, if our internet goes out, I can much more quickly get someone to mend the internet than to get a plumber. And so I think the market will determine it.
Yes, agree.
We are in DC, and I want to talk about the regulatory picture. Simon, with you on a macro level, but Renee, with you on a much more specific level. Some of your competitors have accused you of what's called sort of self-preferencing. The idea that through your automotive insurance arm, you're actually pushing consumers towards your own repair shops or your own installers. In other words, you are sort of double dipping. This comes as Americans are incredibly concerned about affordability, but probably most so around their vehicles, right? The price of gas, the inputs that go into something that they can't live without. How do you respond to those claims from your competitors, and what do you think more broadly about choice and competitiveness in this landscape?
So we really believe in freedom of choice, and if anything, we serve more in the aftermarket than in the OEM aspect, and so we're offering a lower cost option to customers when they choose, and we really fight for things in legislation around right to repair and making vehicle access available to everyone. So really, when you think about that, a question that you're asking, I think that's rumor or speculation. I think if you really looked at how it worked, it's really the insurance companies and the providers that we work with. They set the path of how they want customers to choose who they're going to work with, and we honor that choice every single time.
Reporters' stock and trade is rumor and speculation. Simon, from where you sit, do you feel as though Washington is going to have a durable moment? We're all here. It's a global gathering of CEOs. DC has arguably never been more important. Does that survive the Trump presidency? Does that continue? Or is there a world where Europe regains its footing, where China once again becomes the most important problem, the most important geopolitical nexus for CEOs?
Right. Well, I'm not qualified to talk about the politics, but what I can talk about is business. And, of course, the US as a country is an extraordinarily important global participant in global business. So whatever the administration does, wherever industrial policy leans, has a global impact, not just a domestic impact. I mean, China is still the workshop of the world, workshop floor of the world. They have an extraordinarily important role to play. But of course, now we're in a multipolar world rather than a bipolar world. And so I think that Washington will always have a really important role to play. And of course, different administrations will bring different areas of focus. But the key for business leaders at the moment is in this blizzard of disruptions and distractions is how to focus on the values of the organization, the people of the organization, and the mission of the organization to drive successful business.
An uplifting note to end on. Simon, Renee, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much
indeed.
Please welcome David Gross of Bain Capital and Liz Hoffman from Semafor.
Hi, David. Thank you for coming.
Great to be here.
Let's start with the Gulf. Big source of capital for you and your peers. Just some reporting this morning that they're pulling the financial plug on their PGA competitor, Live Golf. So they're obviously, trying to figure out where to invest, and they're going to have some big bills to pay. What are you hearing from your big investors in the region?
Well, there's obvious concern. I mean, this is maybe something that local players feared, but didn't anticipate was going to happen so quickly. But it's an incredibly resilient and deep region, and I think there's a long-term outlook that still prevails, where there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of government investment. In a somewhat counterintuitive way, this crisis, I think, heightens the emphasis on energy resilience, which was a direction that many of the Gulf countries were already moving, rapidly to diversify their economies away from oil, but also on defense and other industries that will need to be built up more rapidly. So I think coming out of this, you'll probably see a significant investment surge. And so while some are pausing right now to see how this will all settle out, I think you're going to see, potentially something that's even stronger coming out of the crisis.
And what about it from, a sort of human capital standpoint? Wall Street firms rushed in what, historically speaking, now looks like sort of a period of calm in a pretty volatile region. I don't know sort of your mix of expats versus locals, but it had been a hardship posting for a while, and I think it was just starting to not become one. And I'm curious how you think about talent in the region.
Well, I mean, honestly, before this, it's really been a great place to have a posting and a great place to live, and I think it will return to that. We just opened up our office in Abu Dhabi, and there's an incredible talent pool of folks in the region, outside the region, that want to work and live there. I don't really see that changing. There's a lot of things in the plus column around that.
Not paying taxes helps.
Well, there's some beneficial aspects to living there. It's developed a lot in terms of services and healthcare and mobility and all that. With the new Dubai airport, it's going to be the largest airport hub in the world. And so from the perspective of bringing capital, businesses that will invest there, the kind of positive flywheel that happens with those two things, it's not going to stop.
Okay. You're in the business of buying companies, making them better, and then selling them. And that last piece has been tough for the industry for a couple of years. IPOs have been slow, M&A has been picking up maybe, but a little more at the public company level. How real is the pressure in your portfolio, and what is sort of your honest answer to LPs who ask when are they going to get their money back?
Well, I think it's first on the industry level. It's important to put this in the context of the cyclicality of this industry. This is probably the fourth major cycle in the history of private equity where you've had a significant peak period of deployment velocity that's happened kind of post-COVID. A lot of money into technology investments, and it takes time then to digest that, particularly as you go through an interest rate cycle that we've gone to. Interestingly, it really hasn't been an economic cycle. The economy's been quite strong, but there has been an interest rate adjustment, as well as some players having overly concentrated their portfolio in some sectors like technology. So the industry's going to have to work through that. But we've seen it. If you go back to the global financial crisis, you had liquidity distribution yields get down to 12, 15% level, kind of half of what you'd expect to see. But then there'll be some investments that are cleared out that are not that good. Marks will readjust. New players will come in. You see different creative forms of capital, like flexible capital, and we have a capital solutions business that's pretty active in navigating companies where you don't have to quite sell, but you give up some of the upside and you make your way through it. And there'll be some losses in that for the industry for sure. But I think the cycle will come back. We feel our portfolio is in quite good shape because we were investors in technology, but we remain pretty anchored to the right level of price versus growth. We didn't overly concentrate in any sector. We did a lot of healthcare. We did a lot of industrial. We did a lot to add value to the businesses. And so our distribution yields have been pretty good, pretty healthy and fairly normal. But we're watching it, and LP has asked the questions, and they're very, very concerned about how people are marking their assets. It's an ongoing dialogue for sure.
I mean, as you said, software had been maybe 30-40% of the industry's, private equity buyouts over maybe the past decade. I assume it's somewhat similar percent of your portfolio?
So a little bit less. Well, again, this is where you have some definitional questions, which is, what is software? And you have high growth software businesses that traded on, a multiple of revenue. You have very stable cash flow generating, software businesses. Some that are quite insulated against AI. Some might even be accelerated, and some. So there's a stratification. I think we'll lump it all together. It may give you the wrong image. And so, I'd say probably in the traditional forms of software, we might be like in the 20-25% range. But importantly, we like a lot of it. Some of it will struggle, but some will actually be accelerated as you have some of these new technologies take hold. So there will be a stratification that we're all going to have to look at.
What do you think the average mark on that is today versus where it was 6 months ago?
Well, so the marks have, probably come down, 20-25% if you're looking at publicly traded multiples. But the really critical thing is where you bought these things. So some invested at market levels, or even premium to market levels. Some invested with the notion that software, multiples were going to adjust. And so if you go back to before interest rates moved up, we looked at a world where post the global financial crisis, we've been in this very low interest rate, environment. Yet COVID was going to present significant pressures to that equation with all the government, debt and other issues. And so we started underwriting significant expected multiple compression, not just in software, but in a lot of growth businesses, because we did not think that could sustain. So the question really is, how much cushion did you have in the multiples in your marks? If you bought at peak prices, and maybe if you paid a premium to that, you have a much greater distance to fall.
But sorry, when you see private, you said public marks, the software index is down, as you say 20-25%. Do you say, oh, we should probably mark that? I mean, how tethered are you to a pretty comparable company that trades in the market every day when you look at your own private books?
It's not one-to-one. And when we look at marks, we've got a valuation methodology that's similar to the way we underwrite businesses, which is what's the world going to look like 5 to 6 years from now? What's the operating trajectory of the business, and what's the right discount rate, back? And that's not exactly how public, market investors look at things. In fact, today, there's an incredible amount of volatility in terms of, buying and selling of stocks, overselling, overbuying, deep concerns over the latest news headline, kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And that creates way more volatility than I think is anchored in true fundamentals. And so we're constantly underwriting the business plan, the outlook, where we think it will trade 3, 4, 5 years ago. And that may be aligned with, a market drop or an increase. But I'd say the flip side is true too. When the multiples, go up by 25%, we're not marking them up 25%.
That private asset managers are slower to mark up and slower to mark down.
Or potentially more, anchored to what true fundamentals are looking like.
Fair enough. You also have a big credit business. You lent $8 billion last year, and the way I know that is you put out a press release last week, and I was a little surprised because it's a tough time to be in the private credit business, much less bragging about it. So can you talk about kind of what you're seeing in particularly retail heavies, or the funds that people have been clamoring to get out of, not quite understanding what liquidity is? And do you think it's systemic? Do you think it's contained? Where does this go?
Well, I'll start with the industry and talk a little bit about our business. But at the industry level, I do think this is a bit overblown, and one doesn't want to be too serene about any product set that is as growthful, new, and innovative as private credit is, where we're kind of in really the first vintage, the first cycle to see how this is going to perform. But to put in perspective, it's still a relatively small part of the overall loan market, 5 or 6% if you put investment grade corporates, ABF, high yield loans and others in there. It's not maybe as big as some fear, although it has grown a lot. If you look at fundamentals of the businesses, they're still looking quite strong. I mean, honestly, in top 10, 15 percentile of history in terms of levels of defaults, in terms of operating fundamentals, corporate margins, and the like. And defaults themselves are still at kind of post-global financial crisis averages. If you look at high yield loans and leveraged loans, kind of in the 2% range, that's about average. Then you have to dig into private credit, and as we look at our portfolio, defaults they really have not changed measurably, and we're still talking about pretty low levels, 1 to 2%. So both the aggregate size, the degree of exposure that's there, the underlying health actually looks okay. The question then becomes, what was your strategy for raising the fund? How and where did you deploy it? And where did you get the money from? And that's where there's different approaches. And so if you were a large cap private credit investor with a lot of new retail money, and you blew through these funds a lot, and you went into a lot of consortium financing deals where spreads were not as interesting and there were very limited lender protections, as was the case in the last cycle with a lot of covenant-light debt, that looks tougher, both from a fund management and return perspective, but that's also where you're seeing greater redemptions. If you were focused on kind of more middle market where there's covenants and there's protections, you were more measured in how you're deploying it, the spreads inherently are better there, there's not as much software, there's not as much concentrated sectors, that looks a lot better. And by the way, if that was supported by institutional capital, which is much more used to this asset class than retail, you're okay. So I think the headlines are about this part, the retail, large cap, lots of money, not much lender protection. And I think that will lead to returns that might be quite challenged and cause investors to not want to go back into that sector anytime soon. Is it a contagious issue to the rest of the system? I really don't see that. I mean, private credit was there to effectively replace the banks who were not ready to invest. And so the notion that the banks have a contagious risk, they don't really own this.
But what they do is that they lend to the private credit firms, about $1 trillion of that
that's actually pretty small. So the lending, the secondary lending with NAV lines and things that goes to private credit, that's a much more niche product. They stayed out of this market, 60 to 65% of all the LBOs. So we do large scale LBOs. We don't provide credit for large scale LBOs, but we're consumers of credit from those players. And those were, very attractive terms in the last, several years, covenant light, significant, quantums of debt. And it was good for that, but the portfolio construction for the fund managers who did that's something that's, going to have some pressure.
Right, because I think one question people have, and when you talk about private credit, it's not like banks have never screwed up either, right? And it turns out that taking overnight deposits and lending them out for a long time has its own problems, which we saw a couple of years ago. But I think the question that, at least that I have, is it plugged into the system in a way that we don't appreciate, right? Is it either this back leverage from banks that you're talking about? Yeah. A lot of it is insurance money, right? I don't think most life insurance policyholders wake up in the morning and understand exactly where their premium check is ending up. I mean, are there places where it is plugged in that we're only going to find out when something trips up?
Probably two things to ease your concerns. One is the amplifying effect of the credit through the system is there really hasn't been a mechanism for that. So if you take the global financial crisis and subprime loans, these were bad loans that were then packaged, securitized, resold, and there's an amplifying effect through the system. There's really no mechanism for that to occur in private credit, and it has not occurred. The second piece is back to the point of just the scale. These other loans that banks are involved in relative to this, it's really quite small. Insurance, same thing. Insurance companies have some private credit portfolios, but they're much, much bigger into investment-grade corporates, into rated note feeder structures that are pretty much investment-grade, and ABF, which are much more cash flow generative, hard asset-backed loans. So private credit is actually relatively small.
Let me ask about ABF. This is asset-backed finance. And when I think of asset-backed lending, I think of a mortgage or an aircraft lease, where if you stop paying the loan, they can come and take the thing, right? And a lot of the collateral that we've seen, particularly things that went a bit sideways last year, were much more financialized, cash flows, IP, receivables, things that are frankly easier to dupe lenders on. We've seen some apparent fraud. I don't know, what do you make of, it seems to me like there's a bit of mission creep from traditional collateralized lending into new spaces.
Obviously, I'm not an expert on the duped part aspect of that.
You would never get duped. You weren't in those deals.
As a lay thing. I think some of those are also quite small, and the vast majority. I mean, ABF is a gigantic market. Anywhere probably in the low end, 10 trillion or so. The high end, maybe 25 trillion. Relative private credit's like 1.7 trillion. The vast majority of that is in hard asset-backed, ton of residential, commercial, mortgage loans as you mentioned, hard asset, aircraft, data center, and the like. And so the other part is a small portion. However, investors have liked some of that asset-like product because it is pretty cash flow generative. The technology around improving, getting that collateral is pretty well formed. And so listen, there are always going to be incidents of either bad underwriting or too much capital having gone into a certain space in a certain period of time. That's the long-term, history of lending. But this time around, I think that it's much more fragmented. It's smaller than one thing. There isn't technology to really, expand that in ways that we can't see. But we'll have to watch the rate of return ultimately that investors have been delivered, even for institutions who are sophisticated about it. And then for retail investors, again, this is the first real vintage where retail investors have come into the segment. A concern I would have is that the education process was not, fully done and executed. There's intermediaries involved in selling some of these products. And the buyer set's just not used to the cyclicality and the illiquidity. Having said that, why does this all exist? It's because those retail and individual investors and mass affluent investors, they wanted access to this. This was a hole in their asset allocation paradigm. And they were, in some ways, prevented from getting into it from accredited investor status regulations, but they also just didn't have the access. And I think this is going to be a durable secular theme, and it'll be refined, and the regulation will get better, education process will get better. Some of the operators of the funds that don't work out so well this time, they're not going to be the ones providing it next time, but that's okay. That's rotation in the industry. We've seen that a lot. The economy can survive that. But you will see this as a lasting industry because it's meeting buyer and seller with a product that's necessary.
I'm gonna go back to private equity for a minute. I have a bear thesis on PE that I wanna throw on you, which is that debt will never be as cheap as it was for as long as it was, in the near future. Companies are more tightly run today. I was interviewing Henry Kravis yesterday, and we talked about barbarians at the gate, and he said that RJ Nabisco had 11 corporate jets when they bought it. No company has 11 corporate jets anymore. That the uplift that you've gotten from multiple expansion over the years, can't count on that quite as much anymore. That LPs want to do more with fewer managers. There's pressure on fees, especially as we go into retail. My question is, are the glory days of the LBO, the kind of building block of this industry, behind it?
First of all, and I don't agree with all the tenets there, but it's a U.S.-centric view that you've just articulated, because there are many non-U.S. markets where you actually still have a lot of the investment thesis that was so interesting, about buyouts and private equity back in the 80s and 90s. And I'm talking about still many countries in Europe, Japan, Asia, India, China. These are just getting underway with kind of, we've seen the movie before, interesting opportunity. So I'll make that point. But listen, it's different for sure. The value creation levers are different than what they were before, but that doesn't mean they're not interesting and we can't generate, we're targeting mid-20s returns. And top quartile, first and second quartile private equity firms have consistently delivered that. It's different players who have delivered that in different vintages, but those numbers have not trended. Why is that? Because there still is tremendous inefficiency. There's still mispricing. There's economic dislocation, and there's frankly more of that with all the geopolitical dynamics that we have and all the trends that are happening with technology. We invest on either side of that growth and dislocation equation, and that is not really going away. Plus, we have way more in the way of sophisticated tools to be able to drive that value. I'm sure we'll talk about AI in a second, but the technology tools we have today are incredibly transformative. The bigger firms, like us, we're global. We can open up growth avenues in different geographies. We have very, very deep value creation teams that can add value to businesses and reposition supply chains and help them tackle with a lot of challenges they're facing. So, I don't want to call it the low-hanging fruit, but the stuff that was like, that's pretty obvious. I'm going to buy this thing at 5 or 6 times EBITDA, take margins from 5 to 12% and sell it at 12 times. I don't see as many of those these days. We do see a few of them. There's a few of those in Japan and even places like Germany. But in the United States, you don't have those opportunities as much. But there are tremendous growth and value creation levers that are still there. But but they require, many more capabilities, and that's why we're all much bigger firms, and we have deep vertical capabilities and knowledge. We have a 200-person value creation team that's, a little like an army of specialists that can really go fix wide-ranging problems that are much tougher for public companies to address or for sleepier family-owned companies to address. That's a pretty persistent trend in my view.
We'll have to leave it there. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, David.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for attending today's live journalism and to our partner Citadel Securities. We hope to see you here for our afternoon programme at 1:30 p.m.